couple of years ago, I took what many of my friends consider to be a very retrograde step of stepping out of the world of digital agencies and sort of experience agencies and moving client side, moving out of London, and starting to work for a part of the civil service, which was generally considered to be quite a strange move. I started working for Ordnance Survey, who I'm sure, as all of you know, are our national mapping agency, and as I'm sure all of you think of Ordnance Survey, it's a bit like that. Now, when I joined Ordnance Survey, and I'm not saying this is down to me, it was part of a general movement by a couple of visionaries within the organisation. There was a real understanding that despite all the fantastic stuff that was going on, which I'll come into in a minute, that people viewed Ordnance Survey like this, which is both good and bad. This is a fantastic sweep, an understanding of what's happening in Britain today and in the past. It allows you to see and feel maps in a way that just doesn't happen with other products. But to understand it, you kind of got to know this. And this is lovingly crafted. This is a legend which tells you everything you need to know, tells you all the detail, tells you what the different lines on the maps mean, what the different icons mean, and the different sort of variations on them. But really, to understand it, you've got to learn it. And, you know, and this is why Ordnance Survey, I would argue, is still in schools today, is because it gives people something to learn when they're talking about maps. Because ultimately, if you could put something like Google Maps into schools, they go, okay, well, I get that, now what do we do? So, you know, it's fantastic, but ultimately it's far too detailed and far too complicated for somebody who has never come across Ordnance Survey, just wants to pick up a map today can use. But that's part of the problem, because Ordnance Survey isn't actually about those paper maps. Yes, they're updated every year. Yes, they've been going for 70 years, but the detail behind the information is essentially every single data point of every single geographical thing in the UK. It is far, far more detailed than pretty much any data gathering, geographical data gathering that happens anywhere else in the world. And it gathers everything from the sort of the flat cartographic information to sort of topography and heights, to building heights, to information around underlying rock structures, to risk analysis, to all sorts of stuff. And it is pulled together in this fantastic single database. A relational database, one of the largest in the world, where everything is connected. All these pieces of information are connected together. OS is ultimately data. But this is the big problem. And this is a big problem I walked into when I started working there, is that all this data, all of this information is collected and put together and sent out in 3 monthly cycles. It's updated 10,000 times a day in the database, and it's delivered as DVDs. And it's delivered as DVDs partially because a lot of our clients on the, should we say, on the more governmenty side don't like their stuff being online. It's also delivered as a DVD so that we know that we have an accurate record of the development moving forwards. But what this does, apart from being an unbelievably antiquated way to give anybody anything, is it means we have no idea whether our customers like us. Now, we know that the data that we collect is awesome. We've got a very strong understanding of that. We know that the real, what they call GI geeks, the sort of geointelligence geeks, we know that they absolutely love the data that's there, but are they happy with the products that we're providing for them? So we thought our customers ultimately were happy. I really like using the occasional stock piece of photography because it really brings home some very strong emotional messages, you know. And I thought, you know, we thought high up in businesses, you know, the BTs, the big infrastructure companies, government, all the rest of it, everyone was really happy with what we were doing. The reality is a bit more like that, because GI geeks are real geeks. If you think you're a UX geek, you've got nothing on GI geeks, trust me. Going to a GI geek conference is scary stuff. But we thought they were all really, really happy, but we had no idea. And I think this is the key. You know, we would get occasional bits of feedback going, we love your data, but maybe it's not structured quite right, or it's quite difficult to plug this into so-and-so, but that was pretty much it. So in terms of trying to understand and get in the relationship with some sort of customers, I had to kind of go back to the consumer market, the leisure market, and start with something very, very simple. Now, we knew that there was a need. We knew there was a need because it was in every newspaper at the particular point when I came into the company that people were going out walking in, you know, Snowdonia and all the rest of it, and they were dying. And they were getting lost, and they were getting stuck. And they were getting into all these weird situations. And some of that was because they were trying to use Google Maps when all they could see of Snowdonia was this sort of flat grey bit with nothing else really there. But some of them were using our maps. It's like, how could this happen? How could they get lost on our maps? Well, ultimately, if they knew where they were on the maps, that was fine. But if they didn't know where they were on the maps, then they had to have something to tell them. If they were lost in the fog, or if they just had this big map in front of them and they're surrounded by the North York moors and it's all completely featureless, they've got no idea where they sit with that. So when I started, there was a project that was underway to get the new sort of dev team involved to think about, okay, how can we just provide something super, super simple that just tells people where you are on a map, right? And just tells you the direction you're facing in. And ultimately, we did this sort of piece of work, which was just looking at, very much at user need, focusing on the direction and the big numbers to give you the information so that if you're sitting there with, sort of shivering hands and all the rest of it, you can look at it and pull out the map and you know where you are. So it ties together perfectly with a paper map, and it's been pretty good. It's been pretty good in that we have had feedback from it, and we've had feedback in a way that was slightly surprising for us. So built into the app, we also wanted to do something a little bit tricksy that we could use to communicate it. So we did this sort of AR light sort of orienteering compass here over on the left. And as soon as we did it, Silver, who actually produced the real one, said, oh, can you stick our logo on that? It's like, are we not taking away business from you? Okay, fine, we'll do it. And we found out people like to use it. And we found that out because we also allowed people to tweet where they were. So when they used it and they found out where they were, they could tweet where they were. Now, we thought this was irrelevant to a certain extent. Yeah, somebody might want to say that. They might want to put their location. But what we found was who's using it and why. So we started finding out, yes, it's about the sort of the classic Ordnance Survey bobble hat brigade, going out and doing a walk and finding stuff out. But we also found out that scout leaders used it when they were training scouts how to do stuff. So this was being used as a way of being able to educate people. We found the same thing that was going on with D of E. So when people were going out on Duke of Edinburgh, they were being given this and saying, this is the only piece of mobile technology you are allowed to use. Everything else is on the paper map. So they had to learn from that. And then we found out Mountain Rescue were using it to be able to say, this is the location of the place where you need to send a helicopter to because there are 2 people here who are suffering from hypothermia. We found that also Coast Guards were using it because this is the place where there are 2 people that are stuck on a beach and they're about to get cut off and they're about to drown. And so we found that the people using it, because they trusted the brand, because we put a lot of effort in terms of the accuracy and all the rest of it, on something unbelievably simple. I mean, it really, really is simple. But we started to understand both the fact there were customers out there that were willing to engage with us or talk about what was going on, but also the level of trust that was imbibed in the product. And it's got to be said, just as an aside, coming from agency land, when you do a lot of work which maybe are not for the best clients, not the clients that you love, not the clients that are going to change the world, not the clients that have got something new and exciting, it's going to work for a company where everybody you talk to goes, oh, Ordnance Survey, yeah, there's a thing there, real love for it, it's nice. Anyway, to get that sort of feedback is really good. So after this point, or sort of alongside this, we were working on creating an API. So to take all this fantastic mapping data, the relational mapping data that we were looking at before, and plug this into something that people can actually use. Now, bearing in mind, I said before, with the DVDs, we had no idea whether people were using it, how they knew how to use it, etc. With an API, we know who's plugging into it, we know how often they're using it, and they have a direct route to us to talk about when stuff is going wrong. So all of a sudden, we start to have that direct relationship with our customers who are actually using the data, and ultimately with the people who are using the maps on the front end as well. It also allows us to create an experience. Now, if you bear in mind that all that stuff that was on DVD, that's just data. They style it. The people who use it style it in their big GI systems and all the rest of it. We don't have any control over that. But this gives us no chance to actually deliver an experience which is tying together all this fantastic data, all this awesome stuff, with an experience, with an actual sort of information design process. Now, it's very difficult to try and break Ordnance Survey out of the model of looking at functional specifications. But the way they wanted to do it was really to try and break into the idea of creating narratives. Where are we trying to go with this? What are we trying to do? And this, it's all old hat for you. I know I'm preaching to the converted here. But the idea of creating an emotional story for customers in terms of where we're trying to take them in relationship to us was as important as creating a functional experience of what we're trying to allow people to do. So the idea about creating elegant complexity is, one, is picking up the advantages that we have. We can give all that data around the sort of the layouts of the houses and, sort of all the information around the types of land use and all this sort of stuff that other people can't. But if you look at paper maps, they're unbelievably complicated. And if you consider that people use zoom maps, in different ways, how do you take this flat map and allow people to zoom in and out of it? How do you create an experience which sort of smoothly introduces this, allows a level of complexity but makes that elegant? So we did quite a lot of research on this, and this was one of my favorites, was a bit of stuff that we worked on with Yandex, who are the Russian equivalent of Google, I suppose. They do a sat-nav, and they started to look at just very, very basic stuff. When people were looking at their maps at different zoom levels, what were they using them for? And the initial piece of research they did was say, well, how fast are they going when they do it? So they just took the phones and they took looked at the zoom levels and they said, okay, if somebody is walking at 5 miles an hour, or somebody's going at 5 miles an hour or less, we can assume that they're walking. Somebody's going faster than that, we can assume that they're driving. And we found out is that people apply different mental models. So if you're just trying to understand a city, the shape of a city, or the shape of an area, you will look at that in a zoomed out way, and you'll probably look at that sitting down somewhere, all the rest of it. That's not, it's not something you do on the move. But then as you progress forward and you start sort of getting closer in, and you start being able to use this in a much faster, much more contextual way, much more focused on driving capabilities. So as you go to sort of zoom levels 10 down to sort of 13, etc., you'll see that there's a very high level of usage of cars. But then as you get towards the end, 14, 15, 16, 17, I'm not quite sure what happened with 16, by the way. I suspect maybe it's an indictment of Russian driving. But as you start getting closer, you see, that last 100 meters, you're getting out of the car and you're walking again, and that's when you need the detailed zoom. So when we were looking at the designs of the zoom layers, we took that into account. We understood what the mental models were at each zoom level and applied that to the amount of information that we brought into the map. We also went back to our history. So a couple of interesting points here was just the level of detail that was brought in from this 1840 legend that was created. One of those are those 3 blobs in the middle, and I'm glad you can all read that at the back because it's extremely important, was just showing different types of woodland. And what they did was just by using these sort of tiny little pen-drawn sort of things, they could show whether it was deciduous or they could show it was coniferous or whether it was mixed. But what you got was this fantastic collage, the sense of texture to the map, and created this emotional response. It's one of those things that stands out from removing a map from being functional to moving a map to being emotive. And then on the right, really just looking at what was really interesting was the way that all the thousands of categorizations of settlements, in this case from Ordnance Survey, were broken down by different uses of fonts. And you don't really understand the detail about the third one down, for example, having a pub and a post office, but not having, I don't know, Lidl. But you can see that the hierarchy, and that sort of sinks in, and that applies in the way that you view the map. And the designer who I dragged along from Sapient to join me, who started off being super modern designer, everything's got to be clean and da-da. All of a sudden, when he was given all this stuff from the Ordnance Survey's history, just fell in love with it and just went for it in a big way and pulled a lot of this sort of stuff in. Also, because we're a government department, we really have to take into account this stuff and all the visibility. If you look at any map now on your phone or whatever, it will fail all these tests, or fail a lot of these tests. And it will fail a lot of these tests because the information that's being provided does not necessarily sort of provide clarity when you're looking at it with different levels of colour blindness. So we had to design with that in mind because that was a part of our government remit. So when we went into the design of the map, we were trying to answer all these questions. We were trying to create this. There was a level of complexity. You could see the complexity. It was pulling out from the history, but it was allowing us to create something that was modern in the case that it was a zoom map. So again, sorry it's not massively clear, but to give an idea, this is the view of a zoom in to a place in the Lake District. And as you can see here, you can understand where you are. If you don't come from the UK, you can understand that's kind of the UK. You can understand how to get to the big places because there are blue lines. Blue lines motorways, we all know that. We also understand that, bearing in mind this is a map for outdoor users, you can see where the national parks are. So you can sort of plan, that's quite interesting, maybe that's the place. If you look a bit closely, it's all a bit crinkly as well in the right places. So, I want to go somewhere crinkly because that's mountainous and that looks cool. Right, so you know where you're going. So then when you zoom in, we tried to bring in, as I say, this sort of subtlety of using of the contours, but also shading to really give that overall sense, to create an emotional engagement with the topography, with the landscape, while also bringing in sort of the detailed local information we've got over everything else. And then if you zoom into here, so this is where the Keswick Outdoor Festival is. It's where we launched the Glim map last year. You can see that you know exactly what this is. This is next to a lake. The lake's slightly different colour to see. You can see where the woods are around it. You can see where the paths. You can see where the little car park is you've got to pull up into. You've got all the detail around the jetties if you need the whole lot. And to put that into context, that's Google equivalent. So by applying the detail, by applying the complexity, by pulling it back in terms of making sure that it's not visually cluttered, we've created something which gives that information, that sense of place, rather than a location, which we believe is allowing us to move forward as a company. So then we started to look at, okay, we've got this fantastic API, got good response from the rest of it, let's actually make an app. Let's make a proper mapping app that we can do something cool with. And this was the point that we've got buy-in from the rest of the business, because all of a sudden people are interested in what we're doing, people are talking about it, we're getting good feedback from Locate. So we could actually say, right, we're going to do this proper. So we're actually going to sort of get the team together. By this time, I'd hired a team of 12 designers, UX people, etc. We're going to work through what we understand from research that we've done are the needs of our users. So we know there's a need, for example, to create a day out. You don't just want to map on a route, you want to know what the day out is. We know that there's a need to be able to be guided down a path, however dangerous or safe that path is. We know that you need to be able to find out stuff around whether there's barriers in the way or something's gone wrong, and to create these into sort of examples and go through the design process. But first of all, we needed the narrative. And so this comes back to creating the sense of place. You know, if you look at the mapping products out at the moment, they are functional. They deliver a head experience, something that allows you to do what you want to do, switch it off and go away. That is not what Ordnance Survey is about. That's not what Ordnance Survey sits in the minds of people about. We are about allowing people to understand the place, not the location. It's allowing people to get a real sense of ownership and belonging of the environment that they're in. So how can we create that? So we did some interesting research pieces. We looked at what we viewed as the 4 different types of maps. Google Maps on the left, very, very simple, very quick to use, quite removed in terms of view. From a business perspective, essentially a backdrop for advertising. However, something that's very effective and very quick, and it does its job very well. With City Mapper, you sort of strip out the map bit from it completely, and it suddenly becomes location and route, right? So that I am here and I need to go here, which is a perfectly valid form of mapping, and it's a very modern way of looking at how mapping works, and this is why I think City Mapper has been so successful. The next one along is Recce, which is made by a bunch of games designers in Aberdeen, but they have come up with, using our data, so super good data, but then created all the models on it to make the world or the UK feel like a game. And if you zoom in on that, and I'm sure the guys who've seen this, zoom in on that, you'll see little buses and sort of trains moving around on the tracks, right? It feels like a proper game. Now, if you zoom in on it, all those buses and trains are on time. So you know where they are, and it's creating a real world sort of gaming experience. It's lovely, really like it. Creating emotive engagement with maps. And the final one, obviously, is Waze. And what I love about Waze is that it's essentially, the map is made up of you, and it's all about your input and engagement and interaction with the product that makes that map work. If you strip away the stuff from Wazers, it's useless. You know, maps suddenly become not an empiric piece of information, but a contextual piece of information that's being passed on. I'm not going to bore you with this process. This process is very familiar to you. So we went through like a process of design, standard stuff. We did all the experience concept stuff. We then started taking the sketches. We used Marvel to be able to create quick prototypes, tested the bejesus out of the prototypes. Can't say the same sort of stuff as you. I'm not allowed to, especially on film. So that we could find out what was working, and we came up with, I'm going to say multiple iterations. At one point, we did 3 iterations a day. We were scamping, drawing, photographing, sticking together, and testing a prototype in 15 minutes. So to be able to have this pace of creation around the stuff that we were doing was brilliant. Obviously, you can't get into the detail with the sketching stuff, but that's why we moved on to using Exure. It was very, very useful for us to be able to create quite a functional, quite a detailed sort of user journeys we went through, and we created a complete experience that we then tested as a product. Asked people to fulfill like full user journey tasks around this that were based around our original concept work, linking these bits together, tying them into the purchase cycle, etc., and creating something that was pretty complete. And then we tied in the design, and there was coming back to Ed's work, so he was very, very keen to try and say, well, you know, this is all about the map, this is all about the place, this is all about the location, so we have to bring that into the design. So we created the design, which has literally stripped everything out apart from the map and the location information that you want. So when you tap on a map, you get that lovely little pink thing in the middle, and it just says what you want around it, and that's it. You know, we've really pulled back from all the additional pieces of functionality or UI that we could have done there. We've just focused it. And you might notice there that we didn't use the hamburger menu, we used the word menu. Just saying. But we had the same thing. We tested, all the devs are like, hamburger menu, of course use hamburger menu. We tested it, and it was 40–50%. People didn't know what the hell it was. Then when we get into sort of laying out the routes, we need to give the people the information they need to know. Is it hard? How long does it take you to get somewhere? Can you do it if you're in a wheelchair? Can you do it if you're with kids? Have people done it before? Are there any dodgy routes on it? And also by doing testing on different designs, we quickly realized we had to start using black interface because we were saving 30% battery life by doing this. And one of the big issues that our customers said when they were out in the field using mapping products is that the battery runs out all the time. And so we don't want to pull back on the amount of time it pings the GPS because that allows us accuracy, right? We'd rather try and influence the design process to make that work. So then we're also looking at how do we guide people. So we've built a system which allows you to be routed on footpaths in national parks. So it's essentially a sat-nav which can guide you, but guide you in a way which is relevant to you as a foot passenger or as a cyclist, not something that's relevant to you as a driver. So you'll see the focus is not around showing the line that you're going down. It's much more around your relationship with the route and your relationship with the direction that you're going in. And then the big thing, the one thing that came out from all the research we did is that if I don't have the maps offline, I can't use it. So we went through the process of probably the most boring screen you're going to see today. But what this shows is that all you have to do is have a look at a map, press download, and you've got it, and you can take it wherever you want. And that sounds like a small piece of work, but as a piece of functionality that brings excite and delight to the people who are using it, it's phenomenal. So, Andrew Orlovsky was very complimentary, which is very nice because we were really worried about talking to him because if you stick him in front of Google, he will rip it to shit. Ultimately, sorry, I said shit, I can't believe it, never mind. So the fact that he used it, the fact that he's a walker, the fact that he went out with our product, the fact that he really loved it was really very complimentary. So what happened after that? Wow. Now the company really bought it. God, we've done something and people like it. That's amazing. So how do we do this in the business space? Well, the big thing that came up was around working with the government. So we do a lot of work with central office, with cabinet office, and they had a need to create a product which allowed people to respond to emergency situations. Okay, so cool. So if you have a small fire somewhere, then the fire service deal with it. If you have a massive fire, like a fuel depot going up, or if you have a zombie apocalypse and there's the massive chains of command going all the way up to the cabinet office sitting in this room called Cobra, and they need to see what's going on. They need to understand everything that's going on with the police and the fire brigade on the ground, and they need to see that in a map, and they need to understand how it's working. So I can't show you it. I can tell you a little bit about it. So the key thing about this is that we were allowed by the cabinet officers, kind of new to them, although they're obviously buying into the whole government design process at the moment, to say we can't design anything until we understand what the problems are and where we are now. We can't create a product due to the technical specifications you put in front of us because we don't know if those technical specifications have any relevance to your need. So we were allowed to go up and sit in these events, all these exercises they were doing all the way around the country, and we saw what they were doing. We found out that the system that they had was ultimately very paper-based, so it was quite easy to do better. But also there was a lot of assumptions that we could counter. So, for example, a lot of the document management was basically somebody sitting in a room and typing down what everybody's calling in and phoning in and all the rest about all the problems and then saving it somewhere, and that was a recording of what was going on in a big incident. So we could work around this and actually start creating products that we initially built a prototype in, I think it was about 2 or 3 days. So it was a combination of map, tasking and logging. We gave it to people, allowed them to have a play with it, came back with research, and I think we've been now through 4 or 5 iterations, and we're now in a position where it's going to be used in its first big trial, which is on the 14th of November, and we are really quite happy about it. But suddenly we've got all these people from the fire brigade and the police and all the rest of it saying, hang on a second, that thing you're doing for Cobra, that's quite easy, and all the systems I've got at the moment are really difficult, and how do I tie these bits together, and how can I use that? And we suddenly find that just by putting this in the hands of people who absolutely, when they really, really need for something to work first time, they want to use it for the rest of it, wherever else they are as well. So that's kind of it for me. I hope that was interesting. I think you can see that OS is on a journey. We're not there yet. I wish we were, but it's a journey that's progressing. But we're getting there. We're getting closer to our users. We're starting to understand them. We're starting to understand that what we have been doing is maybe not right for all of them. We're starting to understand that there is a great opportunity to work with them because people love us as a brand, and when we start talking to them, that love grows, and we're in a very, very fortunate situation that hopefully we can progress and carry on. Thank you very much.
That was great. That was really good. We're going to have a question or two, okay? Who would like to ask a question? Come on, there we go. Lady in the middle.
How do you decide between what is clutter and what is important?
Good question.
So in your first prototype, you got rid of the contours, but I'm
So a lot of the work that went on around the contours was what zoom level to bring those contours in. So we found that if we tried to bring them in too early, ultimately it just looked like a mess on the screen. We did a lot of playing around with, I'm not going to use the right words because Charlie Glynn, the guy who actually designed the map, will shoot me, but the sort of hill shading and stuff to try and make that work. And really, so you will look, the contours are there, zoom out, they sort of fade away, they go out. We used, I think it was about 3 or 4 different thicknesses and lines to make that fade work. But stuff like, if you zoom all the way in on that map, you'll see that you get down to the houses. You can see the houses, you can see the outline of the gardens, you can see, you know, how they sit on the road. You get an awful lot of detailed information that as soon as you step out, it generalizes and generalizes out. So you've got something that's just doesn't bombard your eyes when you don't want it to. Thank you.
Craig.
Very quick one. What sort of data are you looking for? What sort of data are you looking to collect when some of these apps are actually live? Because obviously you're doing research and getting the right iteration, but that's not the job finished. There's a whole set of cycles. So what kind of data are you going to collect there when this stuff is running in the wild?
So, you know, without meaning to bang on the dull old lean drum, we launched with an MVP. We launched with a product that allowed you to do what we consider to be the basics of any mapping application. We then started going through the process of putting it in people's hands, going out and testing it. We did an alpha launch around it. We started to bring in some of the content areas that we initially thought were right. Turned out they're not necessarily right. We've also gone back to the getting the feedback around what they need on the maps. So, for example, on our maps, people want to know where the entry points are for A&E on hospitals. I know that sounds like quite a, you know, it's a big one. It's not actually something you find if you look at most maps. It's like you don't know what the proper door is to get in here. So that then goes back to the people who are collecting the data to go out to all the hospitals in the country, and we really love for that one. Where is the actual door? Where do you drive? Where's the car park? But it's a question of that. It's just like it's putting it out in people's hands, doing the testing. We've got inbuilt analytics feedback within the application itself. And we're doing ongoing qual and quant in terms of what it works. But the proper launch of OS Maps, the leisure product, is not going to be until April next year, when we hopefully have it locked down in something that's nice and good.
That's great. Right, please put your hands together for balance.
Thank you very much.